Yeah. Okay. I think it's okay. Hi everybody. I hope you can hear us. If you cannot hear anything, please let us know. We are a bit new to this, so hopefully it works. So yeah, let's start then. Looks like everything is working fine. So hi and welcome today for the launch of our webinar series, Join the Pod. Thank you for being here today with us. And we are going to start today with the very first episode that we've entitled The Pod from Within Researchers for Conservation. In this special inaugurative episode, we will introduce who is behind the webinar, but mostly our research. In the following episodes of this series, we will have different themes, which will all be targeting marine mammal science for the first season, and we will showcase guest speakers coming throughout Europe and hopefully throughout the world as well, and they will themselves share their research with you. And we are aiming to release one episode every month. And that's it for this now. So I will leave the floor to Joanne.
Hi everyone. Just a quick introduction as to why we've started up some of these webinars. So since COVID-19 hit last year, we haven't been able to attend any conferences, and especially as conferences are a really big part of PhD students' opportunity to present their work both nationally and internationally. We decided to set up this series of webinars to give our students this opportunity. Also, as we plan for this to be a series of webinars, which will have various different themes as we move through the various different months, it would give us and our colleagues internationally an opportunity to discuss some very important marine mammal conservation issues that we think need to be highlighted, and especially the issues that need attention into the future. This will give our researchers the chance to identify collaborations, and it will also target future funding opportunities. So first up, we have an introduction to the Marine and Freshwater Research Centre at the Galway Mayo Institute of Technology. And this presentation is by Dr. Deirdre Brophy, who is the manager of our research centre here at GMIT.
Hello and welcome to this webinar series. My name is Deirdre Brophy. I'm the leader of the Marine and Freshwater Research Centre in GMIT, who are hosting this event. And I'd like to welcome you to the MFRC and give you a very brief overview of the centre and our research programmes. The Marine and Freshwater Research Centre is located in GMIT's Galway campus on the west coast of Ireland, and the centre conducts applied research that's policy relevant. Our research develops innovative solutions to natural resource management challenges and supports evidence-based decision making. Our research is supported by a range of different funding programmes, both national and international, and we work together with partners in academia, in government agencies and in industries. So the centre comprises around 22 academic staff, around 15 contract researchers, over 30 postgraduate research students, and every year as well we host thesis project students from our MSc programmes and undergraduate programmes as well. We have a very dynamic and diverse community of postgraduate students in the MFRC who come from all across Europe and the world, and it is some of these students who are the driving force behind this webinar series and who you will meet as the series progresses. MFRC research is focused on three main themes, and that's enabling sustainability, conserving biodiversity and improving productivity. Our researchers are helping to ensure the sustainable management of fisheries and their ecosystems by collecting, analysing and interpreting data. We're helping to conserve biodiversity by assessing the response of aquatic species to human impacts and environmental stresses. And our team is collaborating with industry, developing innovative solutions to improve the productivity of the seafood sector. I hope you will enjoy this very exciting webinar series that the group have put together for you. If you'd like to find out more about MFRC research and our researchers, you can visit the website at the link below.
No.
Okay, so back to me again. So I'm just going to give a quick introduction to each of the speakers who are going to present their work tonight. So my name is Joanne and I'm a lecturer and researcher at the Galway Mayo Institute of Technology. My main research interests are marine mammals and acoustics. But the four people who are going to present their work tonight, the first up we're going to have Cynthia Barile. Cynthia comes from the south of France, where she fell in love with the ocean and cetaceans before she even learned how to read. Her childhood dreams came alive back in 2016 when she joined an international master's in marine biodiversity and conservation. And this brought Cynthia to GMIT for her thesis, where she focused on common dolphins. She began her PhD research on deep diving cetaceans in the MFRC in 2018, using acoustic data to investigate how these mysterious animals use their habitats off the west coast of Ireland. The PhD title that Cynthia is working on is Deep Diving Cetaceans in Irish Offshore Waters. The second person that we have up this evening is Morgane Pommier. Morgane also came to GMIT during her Imbricy Master's programme, where she specialised in applied marine ecology and conservation. Her main research interests include top predator ecology, underwater acoustics and habitat modelling, with particular care for their application in conservation. She did her MSc here at GMIT, or her MSc thesis here at GMIT, using visual and acoustic monitoring to explore the habitat use and vocal behaviour of bottlenose dolphins in the Lower River Shannon Special Area of Conservation. After graduating in 2019, Morgane came back again to the MFRC and started a PhD under the Sea Monitor project, which is an Interreg funded project. And the title of Morgane's PhD is Monitoring Cetaceans and Noise Along the Malin Shelf using innovative acoustic technologies. So then when Morgane is done, we have our third speaker tonight, and our third speaker is Fiona Cummins. Fiona came to GMIT to do an MSc under the Conservation Behaviour Programme in 2018, and for her thesis she investigated the effect of dredging activity, particular dumping, in Dublin Bay and its effect on the acoustic behaviour of harbour porpoises. Fiona began her PhD here at GMIT in 2020, and she's continuing to study the harbour porpoise in Dublin Bay. The title of Fiona's PhD is The Harbour Porpoise in Dublin Bay, Assessing Habitat Use and the Effect of Anthropogenic Activity. And then to finish up the talks for this evening, our fourth person is María Pérez Tadeo. And then again, María came to GMIT through one of these international MSc programs. María completed her MSc thesis at GMIT on the behaviour of Brent geese. Following this, then she began her PhD research on grey and harbour seals in Galway Bay and the Glasgow Islands in 2018, using a combination of non-invasive techniques such as behaviour, acoustic techniques and photo identification. The title of Maria's PhD project is Population Assessment of Grey and Harbour Seals on the west coast of Ireland, through a combination of methods and the implication for management and conservation. So with that all introduced, our first speaker is Cynthia.
Thank you, Joanne, for the introductions. So yeah, on this we will get started with tonight's presentation. Just a little disclaimer before we start. All the talks have been pre-recorded. We are quite new to the world of live streaming and we wanted to avoid having unexpected issues with internet connection. So the talks are recorded, but we are all still here and we'll be ready to answer questions if you have any. So what you can do is write your question in the chat box and we'll set some time aside at the end of the series of talks to try to answer them the best we can. And so yeah, on this we're going to start with our first speaker, which is going to be Cynthia. And she's going to tell us all about how she's eavesdropping on the shelf edge. So Cynthia, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Cynthia, and I'm really happy to kick off today our Join the Pod webinar series with a quick overview of the research I'm carrying out as part of my PhD. I think the other thing that defines me, apart from being a cetacean person, it's my obsession with diving and the fact that I really like bioacoustics. So I'm feeling very lucky to be working on deep diving cetaceans using acoustic data to uncover their mysteries, basically. And I've entitled my talk Eavesdropping on the Shelf Edge because that's kind of what I feel I'm doing for my PhD. So I carry out my research in Ireland, a country with a very large exclusive economic zones extending to offshore waters to the west of the mainland mainly. And this is important because it means that all the legislative instruments that are in place will apply to the species that are present in those waters. Then the area has a very complex topography with shelf waters, continental shelf waters, slopes, deep canyons, etc. Together with this, the hydrographic and oceanographic conditions are very complex with different water bodies mixing, upwelling events, fronts, and eddies. And these things taken together lead to enhancements in biological productivity. And the area is actually considered to be one of the most productive regions in the Northeast Atlantic. So that means a lot of food, a lot of predators, so a lot of cetaceans. And 25 species of cetaceans have actually been recorded to date in the area. So quite a good diversity that we have here. Among those 25 species, there are deep divers. We have the majestic sperm whale. I know it's bad to pick favorites, but I can't really help it. Then we also have the longfin pilot whale and different species of beaked whales. But among the beaked whales, I only focus on Cuvier's and Sowerby's beaked whale for data availability reasons. All those species share similar habitat preferences for deep water slope areas where they basically predominantly feed on cephalopod species. And they are called deep divers for a reason. The longfin pilot whale can reach depths of up to 800 meters for 8 minutes long. The sperm whale can go more than 1500 meters deep and stay there like around 32 minutes on average. And beaked whales, in particular the Cuvier, broke the record with a depth of nearly 3,000 meters deep for a duration of 140 minutes almost. So those diving behaviors mean that the animals spend very little time at the surface, which makes them really hard to monitor with visual methods because there is a large availability bias. But luckily, acoustic methods came along and they allow us to counteract this issue of availability at the surface. Sound is very important in the ocean, and it's actually the primary sensory cue for marine creatures. Cetaceans in general use sound for many aspects of their biology and ecology, such as to orientate themselves, to feed, and to communicate. So for those reasons, we can eavesdrop on them by listening to their sounds. But because they rely on sound so heavily, and that's even more true for the deep diving cetaceans I'm working on, because they spend most of their time in a pitch black environment where sound is even more crucial, they are very sensitive to noise. And actually, a recent review of the impact of anthropogenic noise on marine species has shown then that in 94% of 200 studies on odontocetes and in 85% of around 100 studies on mysticetes, significant impacts of sound were reported. The biggest noise sources are shipping noise from commercial boats, ferries, tankers, recreational boats that are basically continuously emitting sound in the world's ocean. Then we also have seismic surveys, which are another predominant source of noise. So that practice is used to map the seabed and find oil and gas deposits by basically blasting air guns in the water every 10 seconds on average during surveys that can actually not last a day or two, but weeks or months. So that's a very big sound input there, noise input in the environment. Another example is military sonar, which has been shown throughout the years to lead to mass stranding events. And in the area I work with, seismic surveys are particularly relevant because the area is of interest for the oil and gas industry. And I've run a quick search actually, and I found that to the west of Ireland, 21 seismic surveys took place in the span of the last 10 years only. So in the area, there is a potential overlap between noise-generating activities, especially seismic surveying, and the presence of deep diving cetaceans. So you can imagine that considering this, something needs to be done if we want to protect the animals from harm. But you cannot protect the species if you don't know anything about it. And the knowledge, that we actually have in Ireland on those species in particular is rather limited. So to fill this knowledge gap, two important data collection programs took place a few years ago. The first one was the Observe Acoustic Project, a government-funded initiative, and the second one was funded by Woodside, an oil and gas company. And I've been able to compile those data sets for my PhD research, which gave me access to data collected across 13 different stations along the continental shelf of Western Ireland, as you can see there on the map. Those locations were targeted because they are of interest for the oil and gas industry. So that's basically this that kind of made the study design the way it is. Acoustic data were collected during several recording periods, spanning basically from May 2014 to November 2016. At each of those stations, bottom-mounted recorders were deployed at an average depth of 1,500 meters. And for our study, as an indicator of the occurrence of each species, we have used the sounds that they are emitting, obviously, because I told you we were working with acoustics. But more particularly for pilot wells, we have used their whistles, and only their whistles, because the clicks are very hard to distinguish from the clicks emitted by other dolphin species. But for sperm whales, solar-based beaked whales, and QVS beaked whales, we have extracted their clicks. The vocalizations were extracted from the raw data files by JASCO Applied Science using their own custom automatic detectors. So to help and provide information that can help and limit the overlap between the animals and the potential threats that I've mentioned before, I'm focusing on different objectives for my PhD. First, I'm investigating the spatial differences in the distribution of those species, and ideally we wanted to see if we could identify some hotspots. We also wanted to see if there were some differences temporally, namely if the occurrence of the animals fluctuated throughout time across different scales. To understand those animals better and most importantly how they use their habitat, the identification of potential environmental drivers is also something that we're focusing on. Then for sperm whales specifically, I'm using acoustic methods to provide size classes estimate of the population. And so we basically aim with all of this to provide recommendations of good practice for impact assessments prior to seismic activities, for example, as well as for mitigation strategies and for example, saying where the service should not take place or when it should not, etc. So what do we have so far? In a recent publication, we showed that the northern sites, and in particular two basins that I have highlighted there, are particularly important for pilot whales and sperm whales, and we are planning to submit a proposal for an MPA designation for those sites. We also showed in that publication that year-round monitoring is very important for those animals, and that impact assessment must be very thorough prior to anthropogenic activities, because we've found a lot of unpredictability in terms of distribution fluctuating throughout time. So it was not very, it was very inconsistent throughout time, so very unpredictable. Then we are in the process of submitting a paper in which we show that QVS and solar-based beaked whales occurrence in the area is influenced by oceanographic parameter, namely the chlorophyll concentration, two measures related to the sea surface temperature and sea surface height. And we found that those drivers were significant to explain the distribution of those animals. So that's work in progress and will be hopefully published soon. And finally, with the study focused on sperm whales, we are basically extracting each individual click to get the interval between each single pulse that composes a click. So basically this that you can see there. And this is something that it's really fascinating, but it's a great technique that basically we use to estimate the size of the animals, because the interval between those pulses that compose a click can be directly related to the size of the animal using equations. And that will basically allow us to confirm or not the fact that only male sperm whales are found in Irish waters. So that's it for me, and it was a quick overview of everything. And thank you very much for your attention. And I invite you, if you are curious about the first publication, you can have a read. And if you have any question, any interest, you can contact me, and I'll be happy to answer. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Cynthia, for this great presentation. Your research really is a good demonstration of the value of large-scale data collection projects. And I think it particularly highlights the potential of static acoustic monitoring. It sounds like deep diving cetaceans in Ireland will be less of a mystery once you finish your PhD, and so hopefully will allow us to protect them a bit better.
Yeah, hopefully, indeed. Thank you, Morgane, for this. So everybody, now we will move to the next presentation from Morgane, who will be talking about listening across the border.
Hi everyone, I am Morgane. I am also a PhD student at the Galway Mayo Institute of Technology, and for my research I'm using static and passive acoustics to monitor cetacean and noise between Malin Head, north of Ireland, and Islay in Scotland. And in today's presentation I'm going to explain how and why we monitor this area in particular. But before I go any further, I would like to mention that the cetacean monitoring GMIT is carrying there is actually part of a larger project called CMonitor. It's a European-funded project supported by the Interreg VIA program, and it brings together partners from Europe and even across the world that are working together to improve our understanding of highly mobile species and work towards their conservation. So I will be presenting the cetacean work within CMonitor, but if you're interested into salmons, skates, basking shark, of seals, or seals, I really recommend you checking out what the other partners are doing. It's also really cool. On this, let's start. So we're going to start by setting the scene and presenting a little bit of context. First of all, where are we? The area we're interested in is over the Malin Shelf, so it's located between the Hebrides in Scotland and the north coast of Ireland. So one particularity here in the area is that it's virtually cut in half by the border between the Irish and the Scottish exclusive economic zone. So this does not affect the environmental condition, does not affect the oceanography, the animal movements or distribution, but it does influence the way the area is surveyed, monitored, and also managed. So an added challenge is when trying to protect a highly mobile or even migratory species is that they may move across different jurisdictions that may have different monitoring and conservation schemes. So there really is a need for coherent and coordinated efforts, and it's in that sense that collaborative projects such as CMonitor have been developed to encourage communication and collaboration between countries. And I want to mention we're actually not the only one working in that directions. There are already two other projects doing similar work out there, Compass and MARPAM, that started a little bit earlier. We're lucky enough in Europe that we have a legislative framework that facilitates standardization of measures across countries. So of course cetaceans are protected by national laws, both in Ireland and Scotland, but these laws are really reinforced by European legislative instruments such as the Habitat Directive and the Marine Strategy Framework Directive. Then on top of this there is some regional agreements, for example the Ascobant Agreement and the OSPAR Convention. Then internationally, there are other treaties, but at our scale here, it's really the regional and European tools that are going to help us implementing coherent and standardized measures across different countries. But I might be going a bit fast there. Before we can start implementing any conservation measures, there are some crucial questions that needs to be answered. The first one being, what species are actually out there? When are they here? And is there any human activities in the area that could be a threat or cause disturbances to the animal? So the first thing we need to do is to look at what information we have and what information we're missing. So regarding cetaceans distribution and abundance over Malin shelf, it's actually quite difficult to find information as the survey coverage tends to be a bit uneven and patchy. And there is one simple reason for this, is that, as I mentioned before, it's in 2 different countries. So the surveys, they rarely go in marginal areas, and they're really rare surveys that cover both areas at the same time. So what we can do is try to compile data from different sources to have a picture of what we can expect to find in the area. So for example, if we take information from the literature, from atlases, from survey reports, NGOs databases, or even citizen observation, we realize that the most abundant and frequent species we're going to detect is the harbour porpoise. Then there is also going to be a coastal population of bottlenose dolphins west of Scotland and north of Ireland. In summer, minke whales are fairly common in the area, and if we move a bit offshore, we will also find common dolphins and resource dolphins. There are few records of killer whales and humpback whales, but these remain quite rare, so we don't expect to find them really often. So this is the information we can get by looking at the few records for our study area or looking at what is happening nearby, so a bit more to the north and a bit more to the west. But there are reasons why we believe it would be worth it to collect more accurate and detailed data in that specific area, and they are the reasons I'm going to outline now. Also, I want to mention the harbour porpoise and maybe bottlenose dolphins are going to focus most of our work because they are Annex II species and so require designation of special area of conservation. So why we believe monitoring there is important? First off, if we look at the geographical position of the area, it's actually a corridor between the Irish Sea and the Atlantic Ocean. So it could be an important passage for animals undergoing seasonal intra-offshore movements. Then it could also be a passage for animals moving along the coast, maybe moving between one MPA to another. So this is a network of marine protected areas for cetaceans around the British Isles. There are actually new ones now that I didn't put on the map, but it's really important to monitor corridors between different MPAs for mobile cetaceans. It's also important to monitor outside of MPAs to see what's happening there and assess their efficiency. And because it's a passage, there's also some shipping happening here, and shipping is one of the most pervasive source of ocean noise, and cetaceans are really sensitive to noise. So this could be a source of disturbance. It's also something we want to monitor. Then another characteristic of the area is that it's subjected to very high tidal currents. And coastal cetaceans, including harbour porpoise and bottlenose dolphins, have been shown to use tidal rapids or to favor certain phases of the tidal cycle to feed. It might aggregate prey in a predictable manner, and so it would be a way for them to maximize foraging efficiency. So that could potentially be an important foraging site for them. In terms of human activities directly linked to the hydrography, we can mention the development of marine renewable energy, so tidal energy. There's also a project in development actually on the Scottish side of the study area, and it also has been highlighted as one of the area with the highest potential for similar infrastructures in Ireland. So collecting data here is also important, as it could serve as baseline information for future impact assessment and could also help monitoring potential positive or negative effects of these devices on cetaceans. Then finally, another reason why we hypothesize that this could be an important habitat for cetaceans is the presence of the Islay front. So what happens here is that 2 water masses with different properties encounters while converging northwards. We have cold and low salinity water from the Clyde and Irish Sea that encounters warmer and salter water from the Atlantic Oceans. And then in late spring, summer, and early autumn, there is also a thermocline that develops, and this creates a thermo-aligned front. So these frontal systems are usually associated with increased productivity, and so prey aggregation that tends to attract top predators. So that's cetacean, larger fish, but also seabirds. So that could potentially be a foraging hotspot for cetaceans, and fronts are actually among the features that are listed and could be used to designate marine protected areas or adaptive conservation measures. So all of the reasons I mentioned are some of why we want to monitor this area a bit more closely. And this brings me to our research objectives, which are first to fill some knowledge gaps regarding cetaceans distribution and occurrence over the Malin Shelf, then provide some models for cetaceans habitat use and habitat preferences in the area, and finally report on noise levels for assessment of good environmental status and identify potential threats that could be caused by human activities in the area. The idea is then to combine all of this information to inform marine spatial planning and an efficient conservation plan. So how are we going to do this? In CMonitor, we're using two different kinds of acoustic approaches. The first one is static acoustic monitoring. So we're using autonomous recorders, sound traps that are broadband acoustic recorders that will allow us to monitor ambient noise, low frequency signals from baleen whales, dolphins' whistles, but also higher frequency signals such as dolphins and porpoise clicks, and also CPOD that are automated click loggers that will detect and record dolphin and porpoise clicks. We have an array of 5 acoustic listening stations deployed at the outer-mouth of the North Channel between Malin and Islay. They were deployed in October 2020 and they will stay in place until 2022. So static acoustic monitoring gives us a very good temporal coverage, so it's very useful to investigate temporal patterns in cetaceans occurrence and habitat use at specific sites, but it's more limited in terms of spatial coverage. This is why we're going to use a complementary approach, passive acoustic monitoring, in order to increase our spatial coverage. So this, for example, is a static array. We can see the Islay front is a bit to the northwest of it. So what we're going to do to survey this area in particular is to conduct acoustics from a mobile platform, an ocean glider. So gliders are relatively new tools, but they're very promising for acoustic research on cetaceans because they move with currents and buoyancy variation. They are quite silent. And also they are equipped with a suite of oceanographic sensors which allow us to record information on temperature, fluorescence, salinity, and so it's really useful when trying to investigate habitat preferences of animals. What we're going to do is going to attach a sound trap on the glider to record sound, so exactly as the other sound traps, from low frequency to very high frequencies. Then what are we going to do with all this data? Well, it's going to be split into 3 main areas of work. The first one is going to use the array of static acoustic receivers and use the presence absence data and maybe data on behavior to investigate temporal patterns in cetacean habitat use at the outer mouth of the North Channel. Then the second step is going to investigate spatial variability and habitat preferences of cetaceans over Malin Shelf. And so for this, we're going to use data from the glider deployments, but also data from vessel surveys that were carried out earlier. And then the final component is going to look at the noise levels and temporal and spatial variations in soundscape to maybe identify potential disturbance arising from human activities in the area. And this is going to be done using data from the static array, but also from the glider deployments. So this is a work in progress. We started our data collection. We are starting to get the first data back, so stay tuned for results. On this, I think this will conclude the presentation. I thank you a lot for joining. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask in the chat box or even contact me by email. I will try to answer my best. Thank you very much and enjoy the next presentations.
Okay, so that was a great presentation from Morgane. Thank you, Morgane, for this. It's true that we actually tend to forget marginal areas when surveying national waters. So this actually, with her study, she actually highlights why we should try to address these gaps in the future. After all, if we think about it, cetaceans are mobile species and they do not know our human borders across countries. But it's also a really nice example of how collaborative efforts can help improving the protection of those animals. So thank you again, Morgane, for this. And now, without further ado, we will move to Fiona's presentation about the harbour porpoise in Dublin Bay.
Hi everyone, my name is Fiona. For this presentation now, we're going to be moving to the east of Ireland, to Dublin Bay and its surrounding waters. So I started my PhD in GMIT back in October last year. I don't have results for you yet, but I'm going to introduce the harbour porpoise as a species and the habitat and what I am aiming and planning to do. The harbour porpoise is one of 7 porpoise species worldwide. It is the only porpoise in Irish and European waters, and it is our smallest cetacean. It's found in temperate waters to the east and west of the North Atlantic and North Pacific Oceans. It's considered to be a coastal species, although we know from tagging studies that it does move to further offshore waters, to deeper waters within the North Atlantic, particularly from tagging studies done in Greenland. Its conservation status globally is of least concern. However, the Baltic and Black Sea populations are endangered. The harbour porpoise is considered to be a shy species, particularly when compared to dolphins, for example, that will bow ride and actively engage with people and will exhibit aerial displays. In comparison, the harbour porpoise actively moves away from boats, rarely exhibits aerial displays, and is therefore considered to be very shy. They can be hard to spot as soon as the water gets choppy at all, and to add to this, they only spend about 5% of their time at the surface of the water. So this means that even if there are animals present in an area, they can be hard to see from land. However, they make up for this by being very acoustically active. Harbour porpoise, like most cetaceans, live in an acoustic world, so they use acoustics for pretty much every aspect of their lives, for navigating and orientating themselves in the water, for catching prey, socializing and communicating, and it's been shown that they're almost continuously acoustically active. Within the area of study for my research, there have been a lot of harbour porpoise surveys carried out. So in 2008, the waters east of North County Dublin and Dublin Bay were 2 of 8 sites surveyed around the country, surveyed for harbour porpoise based on high sighting rates of these animals here. And the area east of North County Dublin actually had the highest density of porpoise out of all the sites surveyed, with an estimate of 2.03 individuals per square kilometre and about 211 individuals in the area. Dublin Bay also had a high density of about 1.19 individuals per square kilometre and a population estimate in the area of about 140 individuals. This survey led to the designation of the area from Rockabill down to Dalkey being designated as a special area of conservation for the harbour porpoise. In 2013, this SAC was surveyed again, and there was an estimate of 1.44 individuals per square kilometre and about 400 individuals in the total area of the SAC. It was surveyed again in 2016 with an estimate of 1.55 individuals per square kilometre and 424 individuals in the whole area. So quite consistent across the years so far. Throughout these surveys, there was between 6 and 9.8 individuals of the individuals cited were young, so either juveniles or calves. This is consistent with a lot of other surveys for harbour porpoise across Europe. From acoustic data, we also know that they're present year-round in this area, and they're detected acoustically on 100% of days that equipment is deployed. We also know from this that at some sites, there is significant increases in acoustic activity during the winter, which is consistent with the knowledge that they move offshore in spring and summer. And there's also significant increases in acoustic activity during the evening and night, which has been shown in many other studies, acoustic studies of harbour porpoise. So we know that the area is really important for harbour porpoises and it's a busy area for them, but it's also important to highlight that it's a very busy area for human activities. So Dublin Bay is home to Ireland's busiest port, namely Dublin Port, and there's constant vessel traffic here, consisting of cargo ships, cruise ships, ferries, recreational boat traffic, and in recent years particularly there's been a lot of dredging. The research aims for my project are to investigate harbour porpoise habitat use here, the effect of anthropogenic activity on this species, and to look at the soundscape of the bay. So a soundscape is basically investigation of all the noise in a habitat, from abiotic factors such as wind and rain, biological elements, so harbour porpoise or fish noise, for example, and then the noise that humans are inputting into the environment. So here I have an example from the International Whaling Commission website, and it nicely kind of shows all three of these elements. There's some wind noise, then that's the abiotic element, then there's fish calls, fin whales, blue whales, humpbacks, that's the biotic factors, and then ship noise, so that's the human element. These research aims are going to be achieved using long-term visual and acoustic data. Two types of visual data are being used for this project: land-based watches and transect line surveys. So land-based watches will involve continuous scan sampling from Howth Head, which provides a great view of the bay. All details of sightings will be recorded, and theodolite tracking will be carried out for as long as possible once a sighting is made. Additionally, all details of any human activity in the bay will also be recorded. Transect line surveys, so this is data that has been previously collected. As I mentioned before, surveys have been carried out in 2008, 2013 and 2016. Additionally, during the Greater Dublin Drainage Project, a number of boat surveys were also carried out, so all of this data is going to be pooled together. A transect line survey involves a boat moving along a predetermined track. Marine mammal observers watch from either side of the boat, and all sighting details are recorded. So the fact that there's been so many surveys done across a number of years is a great source of data, and it's a great opportunity to bring all of this together. Two types of acoustic data collection methods are also being used. Acoustic data is collected using underwater microphones called hydrophones. These can come in lots of different types of arrays, and lots of different systems have been established using hydrophones. Sea pods have been deployed across the mouth of Dublin Bay since 2016. Sea pods can be deployed for months at a time, and they record digital data on detected cetacean quick trains. This year we will also be deploying sound traps from each of the buoys that sea pods are deployed from. Sound traps are different to sea pods as they collect WAV files, so raw WAV files, which means that the data from these can be analysed in a different way. So on to how we are going to analyse all of this data. So for the land-based watches and the sea pod data, this is going to be used to determine the effect that anthropogenic activity is having on harbour porpoise presence and behaviour in the bay. So this is going to be done by modelling the biological data, so the sightings and acoustic data, with the human activity variables, so vessel presence and activity and dredging activity. So the boat-based surveys together with the land-based watches and the sea pod data are all going to be used to get an idea of harbour porpoise habitat use here by modelling these variables together with environmental variables. So what is driving their presence and use of the bay? Then lastly, the sound traps are going to be used to investigate soundscape in the bay, and this also provides a perfect opportunity to compare harbour porpoise detections between sea pods and sound traps. So of course, it is hoped that this research will contribute to conservation of the species. There's a lot of work going on at the moment for MPAs and marine spatial planning, and of course all of this needs to be informed by on-the-ground scientific research, so that the correct decisions, managerial decisions, can be made. And also from a research perspective, that this will hopefully contribute to national and global knowledge of the species. So I want to thank you all for listening today, and I'm happy to answer any questions at the end of the webinar. And I just have a list of references here at the end for anyone who's interested. Thank you.
Thank you, Fiona, for your presentation. I think it really shows how data from various sources collected across multiple years even can be integrated and brought together to improve what we know about cetaceans. And it also reminds us that all these data are crucial to inform management, marine planning, and species conservation in the end. So now we are ready to welcome our last speaker tonight, who is María. She's the seal expert of the team, and she's going to present you her research about the grey and harbour seals along the Irish west coast.
Hi everyone, I'm María, and like my colleagues Cynthia, Fiona and Morgane, I'm also a PhD student at GMIT in Ireland, and I'm carrying out my research project under the supervision of Dr. Joanne O'Brien and Dr. Martin Gamble. I'm working on pinnipeds, and my PhD is about the population assessment of grey and harbour seals along the west coast of Ireland through a combination of different non-invasive techniques such as behavior, acoustics, photo identification, and the use of drones, with implications for management and conservation. And I'm going to introduce you my project. First of all, I'll introduce you my study species. We have two species of pinnipeds in Ireland, the grey and the harbour seal, although other Arctic species have been occasionally recorded along the Irish coast as well. Here we have the harbour seal, and harbour seals are non-migratory species inhabiting coastal areas along the continental shelf of the northern hemisphere, so you can see here in the map. Harbour seals spend significant amount of time hauled out on coastal habitats where they rest, thermoregulate, molt, give birth, and also nurse their offspring. So these areas are really important for harbour seals. The Irish harbour seal population is relatively stable. 4,007 harbour seals were counted during the last surveys carried out in August 2017 and 2018. Grey seals are differentiated from harbour seals because they have more parallel nostrils, they have also a longer head, and in general they are bigger in size. This species is found in continental shelf habitats of the North Atlantic coast, as we can see here in the map. And their distribution varies throughout the year, so they spend a significant amount of time in offshore areas while foraging, but they return to coastal habitats during the multi-breeding and pupping seasons. 3,698 grey seals were recorded during the last surveys carried out in Ireland. As with all marine mammals, grey and harbour seals are protected species in Ireland. These species are listed under Annex 2 of the European Union's Habitats Directive. This means that the populations are subject to monitoring programs, and their habitats must be considered as special areas of conservation. In Ireland, there are 13 designated SACs for harbour seals and 10 for grey seals. Even though these are protected species, still today pinnipeds remain threatened by human activities. And to mention some overall threats, we have tourism and anthropogenic disturbances, with the consequence increase in human and wildlife interactions. Some examples here would be the presence of recreational vessels, wildlife watching tours, the presence of photographers, and the use of drones in the vicinity of the colonies. Disturbance have shown to trigger changes in behavior, increasing display in vigilance and flash into the water behaviors, and hence a reduction in resting and nursing times. Also, disturbance might lead to an increase in stress levels, heart rate, and energetic expenditure, which can affect also the fitness of these individuals. Also, in some cases, disturbances could lead to habitat displacement, forcing the seals to search for areas that might present a lower productivity or be less suitable for breeding and resting. Another important threat to pinnipeds is the interaction with fishing. For example, by catching entanglement in fishing gear, entangled seals are often in great pain. They are unable to swim, feed, and freely move, and they often die. Also, as seals might compete for the same resources, this might lead to a reduction in prey availability. And fishermen often claim that seals are responsible for a reduction in fish stocks. As a consequence, culling of seals might still take place. Another important threat is pollution, and pollution might be due to chemical contaminants leading to disease, entanglement in marine debris, and also due to noise pollution. From industrial activities, for example, dredging and piling, and also seismic activity. Habitat degradation will be another threat due to coastal development. Pinnipeds are species that inhabit both marine and coastal habitats, and due to their colonial terrestrial breeding at traditional sites where they breed every year, these species are highly vulnerable to overexploitation in these areas. And we will also have climate change with the consequent habitat loss due to unexpected rise in the sea level affecting coastal areas, and this might also have an impact in prey availability for these species. As a picture is worth 1,000 words, I have included here some photographs I took myself. So on the left side we can see here two individuals of grey seals that are obviously entangled in what it looks like fishing gear around the necks. On the right side, in this photograph, we can see also grey seals, and one of them is a pup. So grey seal pups have to remain on land while being nursed, as they are unable to swim for a period between 18 and 21 days. Disturbance at haul-out sites might lead to mothers giving birth in different locations. And these locations can be more exposed to the influence of the tides, as is the case in this photograph, and this could lead to pup mortality. Now I'm going to introduce you briefly what my research project is about. First, we did a study in order to assess anthropogenic disturbances due to ecotourism activities on a grey seal colony. This colony is located in the Blasket Islands in County Kerry, in the southwest of Ireland. So here, impacts of ecotourism were assessed by investigating difference in the behavior of individuals and also in the abundance of seals haul out on the beach. This SAC is one of the most important breeding colonies in Ireland, and yet there are no regulations in place or guidelines for tourists or vessels approaching the colony. So the results of this study have highlighted the need for a strict code of conduct for tourists and boats in the area, and based on these results, we have provided recommendations on best practice for ecotourism with the aim of reducing disturbance of grey seals in the Blasket Islands. And these will be published next month. Another part of my project focused on studying the abundance and baseline behavior of haul-out harbour seals. And we studied this in two different colonies located in Galway Bay in the west coast of Ireland. So this study will shed light on the baseline behavior and abundance and also in potential movements of seals in different locations within Galway Bay, providing long-term and year-round monitoring information that might be useful in the design of conservation and habitat management plans at a local scale for this species. During recent years, there has been a significant increase in the use of drones in marine mammal research and also monitoring studies. Although this technology presents advantages in data collection against traditional methods, its potential impacts on marine mammals have raised concerns within the scientific community, as these potential impacts remain largely unknown. So we carry out a study in order to assess the effect of disturbance due to the use of drones on the haul-out behavior of harbour seals in 2 different colonies located in Galway Bay as well. We identify disturbance thresholds, and we will provide recommendations on best practice for the use of drones with the aim of reducing disturbance of harbour seals in future research studies. Another important part of my project focused on the study of underwater acoustic vocalizations of grey seals, and specifically of the grey seal colony located in the Blasket Islands. So in order to do this, we deployed a recording device close to this colony, as you can see there in the picture. And we will try to identify some characteristics and try to assess different parameters between day and night, and also between times when anthropogenic disturbances were present and when they weren't. In the last part of my project, we'll focus on photo identification of grey and harbour seals. For these, photographs of these 2 species were collected at different locations along the west coast of Ireland. And for the identification of these individuals will be used to estimate population size, to identify individual movements between locations, and also to assess site fidelity and association patterns. As I mentioned before, even though grey and harbour seals are protected species in Ireland, the increase of anthropogenic activities in coastal areas such as aquaculture, construction, renewable energy, tourism, pollution, they all could have adverse consequences for populations at a local scale. Regarding anthropogenic disturbances, more site-specific research monitoring programs focus on assessing disturbance to wildlife and to these 2 species in particular are needed, and together with the implementation of regulations, codes of conduct, guidelines, etc. And finally, in Ireland, the interaction with coastal commercial fishing is of major concern. It's really worrying that during the last year there were calls for culling seals in different parts of the country. Seals are blamed for a reduction in fish stocks. This is a very controversial topic in Ireland, and although there is no scientific evidence that supports this claim, fishermen can still apply for license for culling seals under the Section 42 of the Wildlife Act. Furthermore, between 2010 and 2018, 28 licenses were issued in Ireland to control seals. 20 of them were related to commercial fishing. 21 of them allowed killing seals, 5 of them scare seals, and 2 allowed both killing and scaring seals. While more research is needed on these interactions so we can better inform and engage all the stakeholders, killing seals should never be considered as an option. We should focus on tackling large-scale problems such as the unsustainable fishing that has been taking place for decades, and also the destruction of marine habitats. I do believe that it's time to work towards better wildlife conservation of these species in particular. Thank you all for listening, and you will find the references at the end of this presentation.
Great, so that was our last presentation. Maria's research highlights the urgent need for implementing science-based regulations and monitoring programs on a local scale so we can assess anthropogenic impacts on these species. So thank you for a great presentation, Maria. Now we are going to move on to the questions, so I'll pass you on to Joanne.
The mic.
Oh, I think Joanne, you're muted.
Okay, so well done, Cynthia, Morgane, Fiona and Maria. There are some excellent presentations there that demonstrate some of the marine mammal work that's ongoing at GMIT. So we do have a number of questions in, so I'm just going to move between those So the first one we have in from Yulita. So it's for Cynthia. It says, "Hi Cynthia, thank you for a great presentation. I have a question about the MPA in Ireland. Do you know what kind of human activity is allowed in these areas? Thank you in advance for your answer." So Cynthia, if you're able to answer that.
Hi, thank you for this question. Okay, I'll try my best. Yeah, so basically, well, so MPAs, marine protected areas, if we have non-experts here in the audience, are usually done with some objectives in mind. No? So, for example, to conserve a natural heritage or to protect and or even restore the biodiversity in a certain ecosystem. So basically, activities that could be perceived as threats would be assessed. And so for cetaceans, for example, you could, especially for me, for example, for deep divers, we would tend to assess seismic surveys because we know that some studies have shown that there are some impacts. So this is something that would be assessed, and then we can offer some recommendations. So, for example, close season. So say, oh, at that time of the year, we really shouldn't have any surveys because of blah, blah. So that could be one thing that can happen. And actually, Ireland currently has a bit more than 2% of MPA coverage only, and they are aiming to expand it to 30% by 2030. So hopefully we will have more. But then, yeah, the thing is, MPAs are not, it's not, how to say, like a precise science, let's say. So you have an MPA doesn't necessarily mean that you will have zero activity going on. So, for example, I don't know, like I work in the Mediterranean a lot, so I will talk about this. For example, you have the Pelagos Sanctuary, which is an MPA, but it doesn't mean that no boats circulate or there are no seismic surveys or there is nothing else going on, even though we have there are also a lot of cetacean species and also deep divers. So it will really depend on the assessments, etc. I hope that answers the question. I will leave it back to you, Joanne.
Thanks for that, Cynthia. Okay, so we'll move on to the second question that's in here. So we'll go to Morgane next, and I'll come back to there are a few others for you as well, Cynthia, so we might come back to those at the end. But there was one from Virginia from Morgane. So hi, Morgane, thank you for your presentation. The plans you have for your PhD are super interesting. How are you planning to differentiate between the odontocete species occurring in the area?
Thank you. Thank you for your question as well. So yeah, it's a good question, something I've asked myself as well when I started. So I suppose the first distinction we can make is between dolphins and porpoises. This is quite easy because they use different frequencies. So porpoise will have very high frequency clicks. So for this, we have already some automatic detectors or classification tools that work pretty well. But then I suppose maybe your question was more targeting between dolphin species. And this is another story. It's really hard to tell dolphin species apart as for now, based on what we know. So I don't know yet if we will be trying to differentiate between the dolphin species. I don't know as well because we're only getting started with the data, so we don't know if we will get actually a lot of dolphins detection. But when it comes to differentiating them, it's really difficult. So there are some colleagues that are working on ways to differentiate among species. So for example, colleagues from the Compass project. And I know that based on the clicks, for example, I think the clicks from resource dolphins are a bit different from common or bottlenose dolphins, but I don't know if it's something that we will be able to implement on our data directly, or if we will just study dolphins as a group. Because we're also using two different kinds of receivers, so yeah, I think it's a difficult thing to do. But yeah, thank you for your question. I hope that answers.
Okay, thanks for that, Morgane. So I move to Fiona next. Fiona, Matthew had a question for you. Will you be using public sightings of harbour porpoises as well, or purely using data supplied by individuals within the project?
So for the purpose of modelling to look at habitat use and the impact or effect of anthropogenic activities, we will be using effort-based data, so this is effort-based watches and the boat surveys that I talked about. Unfortunately, watches so sightings recorded by the public, they can't be standardized, so I can't incorporate them. So when I talk about effort watches, this means that also the time that you spend watching or is recorded, and you can kind of note down, you get an idea of the number of sightings per unit effort, so over time or over an area. So having said that, though, the watches, the reports that are sent in by the public, they're really useful for looking at changes through time and where sightings are made and all these things. So definitely keep reporting them to the Irish Whale and Dolphin Group for sure.
Okay, thanks for that, Fiona. So Maria, we'll move to you. We've got a question from Virginia. So hi Maria, great presentation. It's great that you've done so much progress. Do you already have some results to share on the disturbance of UAVs?
So yeah, we are working on that chapter. So the fieldwork is done. We have some results, but they haven't been published yet.
Okay.
But we can say there is an impact.
Okay. Okay, thank you for that. So that seems to be the end of the questions that are there for each of you as individuals, but there are two others for Cynthia. So I don't know, Cynthia, would you like to answer those two questions?
Yeah, sure.
The first
try.
one we have there was from Saeed, and the question was, what would your expectation about underwater soundscapes what would be your expectation about underwater soundscapes in MPAs?
That's a nice one. Yeah, I guess, yeah, I mean, when it comes to soundscapes, it's very tricky, obviously, because sound doesn't really stop at a fictive boundary that would be delineated by an MPA. So obviously, if you say you would have your MPA limit at point A and 1 kilometer away from this, or even 200 meters away from this, if there's something passing, of course the sound is not gonna stop. It's gonna go in. So that's, yeah, I would say that it's very complicated to say what to expect first, and also you have to consider which source of noise you are talking, because if it's a high frequency source, then the sound will propagate less far, whereas if we're talking really low frequency sounds, it will propagate really far. So for example, I don't know, if I'm listening to recordings and sometimes I can hear the air guns from seismic surveys, and I can hear them sometimes very, very, very fainted, so I know that they come from very far. So of course it's really hard for this, but yeah, that being said, of course that's also why it's important to consider that, you know, an MPA has to consider these things when considering the diameter of the MPA, or like the area it will cover, especially, you know, depending on the species. Just simply for sperm whales, for example, in that project with the static devices, we have had detection ranges of up to 100 kilometers as well. So that also is another thing that highlights how important it is that an MPA cannot be a little square of 2 square kilometers, especially if you're talking about species like this, or if you're talking about noise, because of course, otherwise, if we are talking only about noise, then it will not be such a difference then. So yeah, I can't really say what I expect. I'd say it depends on how big the MPA is, where it is, and what restrictions are going to be placed. But yeah.
Okay, thanks for that, Cynthia. Cynthia, there's one last one for you, and I think this would be a very short answer, so I suppose I'll ask a few. It's from Lucas, and they want to know, you mentioned a number of 21 seismic surveys in the last 10 years for the Western Irish waters. Have you by any chance compared these numbers with the ones for example, Northeast British waters?
No, I didn't. Actually, when I did the presentation, I was like, oh, maybe I could find out exactly how many. So yeah, I went on the, it's basically the website from the, the petroleum infrastructure, like the government, the website from the government. So it's the Irish one, so I could select some areas. So I targeted specifically west of Ireland, but you could probably do the same thing for other countries and just look up what numbers you can find there, because you can usually select the area. So if you can do the same in other countries, then you could definitely have a look and compare what is there.
Okay, thanks for that, Cynthia. I think that's the end of our questions. I don't see any more on the chat, so thank you all for those questions as well. I'm sure the girls really appreciate those.
So yeah, thank you everyone for joining us this evening. We hope you all have enjoyed this first webinar of Join the Pod. And a special thanks to Dr. Deirdre Brophy for her introduction and to the Marine and Freshwater Research Center.
So for anyone who missed any of this webinar or wants to rewatch or maybe recommend to someone, we have recorded it and it will be available to watch on this YouTube channel after. So our next webinar will be in September. We're going to take a break because we know everyone's busy with fieldwork and summer holidays and hopefully outside in the nice weather. But in September we'll be back and we'll have some exciting new speakers, so we're all looking forward to that. We'll keep you updated on this, so make sure you check out our website, sign up to our newsletter and subscribe to our YouTube channel to stay tuned for our news. So a big thank you from us all again, and we'll see you again soon.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye.